Joe, let's go over to the ACC here. Clemson and Pittsburgh, a moderately probably big game in the ACC this week on how things are going to shake out. Maybe not at that number 1 overall seed, but Clemson Pitt still in the mix here at 7-2. Your thoughts on going into this game, Clemson and Pitt?
Yeah, both these teams have beaten the crap out of back-end programs in the ACC, and they have lived off of that success until they've actually been faced off with competitive opponents. We saw that back-to-back weeks with Pitt playing against SMU, and UVA of all teams was competitive enough to knock them off. UVA sneaky good, by the way. That's something that we should monitor, the way that they finished this year. Clemson as well. Clemson has been extremely underwhelming. They have produced all of their big offensive performances and all their big point outings against really crappy teams on their schedule. But the minute that they faced adversity against Georgia at the beginning of the year and then Louisville was where we saw their true colors. I think that if I were to identify who is the least fraudulent in this matchup, this is the matchup of the ACC frauds, Blake. It's Clemson. Pitt has benefited from a lot of, I know that sounds just gross to even make that pick. They have benefited a lot from turnover luck. Their secondary has been really bad. They're allowing 251 pass yards per game. Pitt.
Oh, I'm about to
Pitt
say.
secondary has been very bad. They're allowing 251 pass yards per game. They're getting smoked.
Yeah,
Klubnik has come back down to reality from that very weird, unexpected, and unearned Heisman hype that some people randomly were giving him. I still think, though, this is a game where he's going to step up and he's going to play really well. Phil Maffa should be able to produce on the ground as well. This Pitt team is just not built to out-physical a team like Clemson that is still up to that caliber of physicality that we know that they can produce.
I agree. And listen, we've talked about this again when we've talked multiple games this year on these Tuesday special shows. Mm-hmm. This is a bad matchup for Pitt. I know that you had 5 picks against McCord, and I know that it didn't look as bad, and it was an anomaly in a lot of ways. You're giving up way too many yards. And the God's honest truth is we can say whatever we want about Dabo. We can say whatever we want about Garrett Riley. This just is not the matchup for you, in my humble opinion, if your secondary is going to continue to be as bad as it has been. And, Joe, not only are they not being able to get off the field on third downs because teams are converting on them religiously and Joe, that's literally how teams are converting on Pitt. They're throwing the football. The problem is that I think that we have a massive staff mismatch here. And I'm saying that about Dabo, right? And people are out on Dabo. But, man, you can't stay on the field if you're Pitt. You can't stop teams from throwing the football. And, look, I get it. Clemson has been fraudulent in moments. They haven't been fraudulent throwing the football down the field. They haven't been necessarily fraudulent with running the football. Joe, you go back to that Louisville game. They converted 4 third downs, and that got called back for a penalty. So, yeah, Louisville beat them. What happens if they don't have those penalties? What happens with Cade Klubnik hitting a wide-open target on third down, but a holding call brings that back? Like, though, I get the whole Louisville thing, but I think you got to look at that game in its totality as well. I just think Pitt has kind of came back down a little bit to reality here, as you mentioned. And this is still an air raid offense. This is still an offense that wants to predicate themselves on throwing the ball on first down, 6, 7, 8, 9 yards. That's what they want to do. And then when you get Maffa in there and you want to spread it out, Joe, they're going to give it to the 235-pound back and they're going to let him run. Look, again, styles make fights, and this just is not a great style fight pick for Pitt.
And this also sets up like a really good opportunity for Dabo and Clemson to do what they do best. And look, I keep digging into Clemson. I really don't care if Clemson fans get annoyed by that. This is a situation where we can pretend that this was a good win. Pitt should not be ranked. They're not going to be ranked after the playoff rankings come out. They were ranked last week after this loss to UVA. You're going to be able to act like, oh, look, we beat one of the better teams in the ACC. Dabo is so consistently great in games like this. He's got a little bit of Brian Kelly in him in that way. Winning the games.
Here you go.
Winning the games
Dabo's
that you're supposed to.
Dabo's got 2 national titles. He's not. Don't compare him to Brian Kelly. Okay. Don't do that.
I'm comparing him in the sense that recently,
it's a bad.
Recently, in the past 4 seasons, where this slide has occurred. Whenever there's a game that's winnable and that is important for pushing back against the narrative against him, he wins these games. They're going to win this football game. I don't think Pitt matches up well with them. They've been a fun story to track, but their luck runs out in this situation.
I agree. Again, one thing that I want to point out too here about Pitt, they have not been able to run the football. And that front seven of Clemson, a lot of people have, gotten on to them about not probably establishing defensive dominance the way that we thought that they could. Joe, Pitt cannot run the football. They can. They put a lot on Eli Holstein's shoulders, and it is not panned out, and it's not paid off. So let me ask you this. Even if Pitt, we're both thinking Clemson's going to win here. I want to ask you this. What happens if Pitt wins? What happens if Clemson wins? Because, listen, they're still in this ACC hunt here. And listen, there is a slimmer of hope for Clemson to still remain in this playoff picture. They are not out of it as much as we want to believe that they are, because they still have a path to the ACC championship game here. So what happens, in your opinion, if both of them win out here?
Pitt, it doesn't mean much for me because Louisville right now is ahead of them in the standings in the conference. And also you still have Miami, who realistically should win out, assuming that they don't completely fall apart. And also they have to go head to head with Louisville. So that's going to impact what happens with that situation. If Clemson wins this game, they have to beat South Carolina in the final week.
Well, here's the thing.
That doesn't impact ACC standings.
But that's my point. They can lose to South Carolina. I mean, they need some help with SMU losing or Miami losing again. They're not out of this. Everybody writing them off right now, I think it's foolish, because SMU, although I think really good, Joe, they can slip up here down the stretch now.
I really don't want Clemson to be in this playoff picture. I don't think that they've earned it. I really don't think that if we're talking about a team
the Big 12 has.
Well, I agree with that, and that was why yesterday I said that I think BYU is overrated. But if Clemson gets in, we're going to get 2 ACC teams in potentially. If there's teams in that bucket that we can talk about here that are on the bubble and could find a path in Clemson, again, they're one of those teams. If there was one of those teams in that bucket that I think would provide the least competitive outcome, it would be them. And I know it was week 1, but that's the evidence that we have. Louisville's also the evidence that we have. They're not good enough to dominate and win games against evenly matched or opponents that are much better than them. They have no evidence of it.
The only thing here is that they massively, meaning well, SMU would have to lose twice here because they haven't lost an ACC game, so they have to have Miami to lose again here. I mean, SMU's got Boston College. Castellanos has stepped away from the program after getting benched. They go to Virginia, and then they have Cal. So SMU, I mean, as much as SMU, we want them to, you'd want them to lose. I mean, Clemson definitely needs some help. They're not out of it. This week could tell a lot for SMU if they are able to beat Boston College. All right.
BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.